I'll try to talk about five things. Five things. Photography. Photographs. Graphs. Graphs. The 3Ds. I'll get into that. Empathy. The fifth thing is partnerships. So those are the five things I'll be sharing. Photographies. Sometimes we forget how human we are while discussing topics of climate change. And I can tell you we forget that when we are in a negotiation room, in a COP, or between countries. And you know, you have the delegations stepping, everybody with their ties or their dresses, being very in the topic they are addressing. Or when we're discussing local politics of what the energy transition should be, we tend to mask how human we are on that. One thing I learned early in politics while being Minister of Labor, I was talking by a former Minister of Labor, a friend of mine. He said that politics is like, it's like when you're in high school and you take a photograph of the class. You take a photograph of the class in high school, what's the first thing you do? You know it right away. What's the first thing you do when you look at your class photograph? You look at yourself first. It's very human. It's your instinct. You want to know how you look for posterity into that photograph. Either if you're with your eyes closed, either if you're smiling, or if you're in a goofy position. Everybody takes the picture, the photograph, looks at it, and the first thing you do, you don't look at the whole class. You don't look at the time, you look at yourself. And that's what happens in politics very often. While in a global discussion, we tend to first think of how we are going to appear in the current picture and in the future picture, how that discussion is evolving. As humans also, we tend to mask. We're not necessarily straightforward sometimes of how we look on that. But also, I do believe we need to be empathic, not only of how we look at ourselves, but to understand how others look, how others perceive their position is. And I'll link this eventually with discussing about empathy. But let's put that first concept there. How we look at ourselves in regard to a situation. Either if we look good or not. Because I think this is relevant for the discussions of the challenges that I have. The second thing I want to talk is about grass. About the grass. The park. And in the last 20 years, I have come across two great examples that I want to share with you today. The first time I listened to this was with a colleague of in Brighton, in Sussex University. One of my professors, he made his studies in geography. He's a specialist on development. But when I asked him what his thesis was, his capstone for graduation, he said, my capstone is on grass in the parks. And I was very intrigued. Can you do a thesis on grass in a park? He said, yeah, actual thesis. So his approach was, what was the appropriate size of the grass in order to have the best experience in the park? And he did a whole thesis about it, and all that came from that. How often you need to cut it, when you need to cut it, what was best for any activity. A whole thesis on that. Not long ago, I came across another professional, an ecologist professional, and she addressed the same question. How long should the grass be on the park? On her framing as an ecologist, the answer was, you should not touch the grass in the park. you should let it grow as much as you can. Because it's there, where in urban ecosystems, actually, you get all the bugs, the flowers, the insects that actually pollinate all around and make transformations for us and give us services. So to the same question, how high should the grass be in the park? She had a completely different answer. So to the grass story, also very banal, I want to add 2 points. How important is the way we frame problems or situations in regard of the outcome of the answer we gave? That's one. Depending on how we frame the question in the same subject, we can have completely different answers. But 2, are those answers exclusive one of the other? Is either we can have one or the other, but not both? And that one is an intriguing question. Let me put another example. Very long ago, I used to be in a high school rock band with my friends. And we got into these huge debates around who was better, John Lennon or Paul McCartney, Jimmy Page or Robert Plant. And then one day I thought to myself, why can't we just enjoy both, together and separately? Why does it have to be one or the other? And we humans tend to do that, tend to think it's either one answer correct or the other. Is it there possibility that we can have a dialogue between different answers? So that's so far with the grass and how sometimes we can framing determines our answers, and also sometimes we believe we have the answer. Can we establish dialogues between answers and narratives and framing of problems? Sometimes humans, as we see one picture in which we see ourselves, we tend to grab only one framing of the problem and the question and get attached to one answer. But then I'm going ahead to what I want to express. So I'm getting into the 3Ds, my third point. In 2019, Costa Rica developed the decarbonization plan of Costa Rica. It was the first plan of decarbonization national of a sort after the Paris Agreement of 2015. And it was a transformative plan, not of the environment, but of the whole economy. It was developed by the Ministry of Planning, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Agriculture. Everybody was involved, civil society, you name it. And we developed the decarbonization plan. And at the moment, using these concepts I've just showed, my framing of the thinking was that net zero, it's the final line. Net zero, it's the goal. We need to do everything to get there, right? So we did that, and our decarbonization plan was very praised. It was polemical at the time, but also came across with several solutions. When I look back, even though I believe it's still the plan is good, I question my narrative and its framing in many regards. One, it's thinking about net zero as an end line. Now, if you think about it, about framing, net zero, it's not the end, but it's just the beginning. Net zero as a problem we are aiming, or as a solution to solve a problem, I realize now it's the beginning of a series of transformations that we don't even have started to understand fully. So net zero, it's not the end of something, it's the beginning actually of something. And something that in many ways we don't know yet some of the answers. And I want to go, let's keep in mind the grass and the photograph. Recently, I came across this conversation, which is, from what I come from, very straightforward. There was this discussion group in how can we make countries and people go faster to renewables. It was a proposal, well-meant proposal, with that framing. How can we make people how can we make people embrace more rapidly renewables? From our picture and our framing, that's the right narrative. Well meant. But is that the best narrative to actually enforce that change? When we developed the decarbonization plan in Costa Rica, 2019, we were starting as a country that has 99% of its energy, of electricity, being clean and renewable. So we were well ahead on that. A country that has 30% of its land protected, 50% forest coverage. Actually, we increased the ocean protection from 3 to 30%. But when you see other realities, when you see a country that depends 30% of its economy on extraction of fossil fuels, when more than 25%, and I'm talking in these cases literal countries in Latin America, my region, 20% of the government revenue comes from fossil fuels. Employments come from fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are heavily subsidized. That means that if you want to take away that subsidy, you need to increase the price radically. So the outcome of saying we need to go renewables as fast as possible, full stop, cutting the grass to that level, seeing that picture, what shows is a threatening scenario that generates lots of anxiety. Why? Because that transformational brings along too many changes that you don't know how you're going to deal with them. And I can say that politically. I've seen in Latin America countries that have huge riots, including almost ousting a government because of changes of energy subsidies. I've seen candidates not talking about this because they know it's a loser in an election. It's better to talk about fossil fuels because it's better for the election. So does that mean there's no solving of this? No, I do believe there are options, and I come here to the 3Ds as a framework, conceptual framework that I like to share to address this dilemma. And I call it 3Ds because the first D is decarbonization. We need to decarbonize. And more, that's not an optional debate. It's a must, locally. In 2015, less than 10 years ago, Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement has many names. Paris Agreement's one. Second is the destruction of the demand of fossil fuels. That's the second name of the Paris Agreement. The third name of the Paris Agreement, transforming about everything, transforming how we do everything. That's another name of the Paris Agreement. If you were to put that on the text, 190 countries will have approved it? I don't think so. If you put in the text, all the here sign will do everything as possible to not go beyond 1.5 or 2 degrees, will you sign this? Yes, because it's a confusing narrative that does not explicitly say you need to change the way you produce about everything. Narrative again. In that picture, where it's kind of blurry, we accept all to be included in. So the first is decarbonization. 10 years ago was a contested area. The United States was not there. 2019, when we launched the decarbonization plan, we were on our own, basically. If you think about it, 2022, Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, the largest injection of billions of dollars for transforming the industries and owning the electric vehicles market, the renewables market. Why? Because that's going to be the industries of tomorrow. So that was a contested area. It appears it's not anymore. And we are in a global competition to dominating those technologies. So now it's not optional. Now even the skeptics know that the forecast of the demand of fossil fuels is going to change in the future. Decarbonization.
So if we need to decarbonize, because it's the ethically correct thing to do with the next generation, but also it's the way, the direction the world is heading, and if we want to be better off, we need to move in that direction, we need to put another D, which is not often discussed. In Stuttgart it is, perhaps, I've just found, but not in many developing countries. Diversification. We need to come up with options of where am I going to stand in the new photograph? How am I going to look at? How am I going to appear in the next photograph? What is my niche in the future economy? Because if it's only decarbonization, full stop, you go renewable, full stop, and I don't have a pathway, I fear the same. We all fear the same. We fear about ourselves. We fear about our children. My main motivation for working in climate change and doing decarbonization, my son. But if I cannot point a livelihood for my son, not only in the long term, but in that pathway, I fear as well. I have anxiety. I need a narrative. I need options, more narrative and options. I need a way. So the second D is we need to work on diversification. And the third D, I believe, is we need to depolarize the political debate around this. And this is very complex. I'm not bringing solutions to that. But we need to depolarize that because we're talking to pathways of not 4 years. We're talking a pathway literally of decades in which we need to consistently decarbonize and look for other options for jobs, for market, for energy, for livelihoods, for sustainability. So we need a depolarized debate that doesn't kidnap in identity politics something that's about the common future. And those three are the 3Ds that I propose as a conceptual framework after talking about photographs and grass. And then I come to a fourth point, which is empathy. Because the bottom line of this is empathy. 2019, when one of my largest, strongest motivations to do decarbonization, even though people are saying you're crazy, this is not going to be relevant. Main motivation, my son. He's going to be 38, my age when I became president, in 2050, when the Paris Agreement has to have delivered. So he's going to be, hopefully, a grown man of my age, and hopefully I'll be around. And he's going to say, Dad, you were president. What is it you do? You did something for our generation? Well, that was my big motivation for me to work and go ahead. 2022. Yes, that's a very powerful motivation, but it's not only my motivation. Countries that heavily rely on fossil fuels for the livelihoods, or they need to give answers as well to their children. If you say you need to go renewable, full stop, it's kind of you saying you're on your own. You have got a threat and you're on your own. Go figure it out. No wonder you are resistant. You're anxious. You don't like that picture. We need to be empathic on that. We need to be empathic. Try to take off the mask that we use in diplomacy and politics. Think also obviously with our brains, but our hearts and our guts. They say more and more that the neural system is wired from the brain to the digestive system. Empathy. And that we have to use in the regional debate, talking about global and local. We have to build that empathy. Countries like Nigeria, heavy exporter of fossil fuels, large population in Africa. Colombia, large producer of coal. Ecuador also. 25% of the country budget relies on exports of fossil fuels. We need to come together, and we need to have an empathic debate on how to do it. Intergenerationally, an empathic debate. We need to get onto an understanding, because as we are humans and we tend to forget, we have feelings in regards of these topics. Some people feel anger. Countries feel angry. My country, they say, I was a couple of days ago with the High Envoy for Marshall Islands. Her country is going to disappear in a couple of decades. Has she polluted, or her people? No, but the country is going to disappear. Anger. Guilt. The feeling of guilt of, oh, what have we done sometimes? And then sometimes, I'm just naming those two, it gets so unbearable that you might respond to the opposite, indifference. It was not me who did that. Somebody has to fix it, not me. So in regards of anger, indifference, guilt, we need to come across other kind of solutions and feelings and empathy to bring a path. And I think we've done it sometimes. The Paris Agreement is an example of that. It's an example that even it's tough and even it's imperfect, we can come across and agree in certain terms to certain solutions, in a common pathway. That doesn't mean we have to forget or erase things that have happened, but we need to have an emergent paradigm in order for together, that's important, together have solutions. We usually think in terms of an us and a them, globally, regionally. Without never obliterating diversity, we need to also, in that diversity, consider the common us to make that possible. And to my fifth point, you have remembered I talk about photographies, I talk about grass, I've talked about the 3Ds, decarbonization, diversification, depolarization of the politics. I've talked about empathy, how hugely important empathy is on the narratives and on the pathways we choose, even in those that are well-meant. Again, 2019, that we go for decarbonization. Perhaps I didn't realize how threatening that argument was when we started putting it down there. My fifth point is, and I think Eva has a similar point, is that we should work and strengthen the narratives and the collective work around transformative partnerships. We are in this together. It's not you to go to figure out on your own the pathway on renewables. And I also have an example on Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a country that has no army since 1948. And as I said, has more than 99% of its electricity being clean and renewable. And many people say if we should apply directly those schemes. But I understand, I will do wrong, I believe, if I preach to everybody, abolish the army, and to preach everybody, go 99% electricity, clean, renewable. Well, the power of that is the power of example, but of example of change. Good change is possible. It's possible that a mid-income country in the middle of America can achieve that. If a country like that characteristics can achieve that, others can achieve really standing things. But it's not a literal example. That is to say, every community, every country has to find their own ways into these challenges. But we have to do it together, because there's an asymmetry on knowledge, there's an asymmetry of finance, there's an asymmetry of many things, but there's no asymmetry on a solution. Either we have a solution, common solution, or we are collectively doomed There's not such a thing as, say, decarbonize half of the world and the rest fails. If we fail all. There's no such a thing as also as a non-democratic or multilateral solution to this. We cannot impose a solution on this, because by imposing it, we will be, in many regards, destroying dear values of humanity. But that's why we need these transformative partnerships, and we can go together and faster, because we need to go faster. But is there a non-democratic way of going faster? We should leverage on ourselves. I want to end up also thanking the whole city of Stuttgart. I've learned lots in this couple of days. And I think actually Stuttgart's got one great example because of its own challenges on the transition and on its own livelihood, so linked with the auto industry and how it needs to be changed. But it's something that's been addressed in the past years. So many countries in the world are not addressing this discussion because it's very threatening. So there's a great deal of things that we can learn together in this kind of proposed transformative partnerships. The way we frame narratives, that means the way we frame how we see the world, how we see the grass, and what we want to do with the grass, determines a lot of our outcomes. Even when we believe we need to cut it all, because that's pleasant for the body, or if we need to just let it grow. How we frame problems, how we frame narratives, determines how we act. Those narratives we should build from understanding of the other, empathy, and building partnerships to solve that. I do believe, and I say believe, and I say it singularly because I don't think I have the complete answers, but I believe in that route, in that line of thinking, there may be some solutions in the diplomacy of climate, in global institutions, finance, and many others, and also how communities, within communities and throughout communities relate, that could have the power to improve our solutions. To be empathic of how the photograph of the other looks like, not only mine. And to start thinking that we have to all look good in that picture, not only me. We all need to look good in that picture and be satisfied. We all can agree on the different places of where the grass has to be how. We need to enhance not only our rationale and the science behind it. I do believe in the science, but when we emphasize a lot on the science, it's emphasizing, and we have a problem, but we need to be empathic about how the solution impacts the difference. That doesn't mean to play along to accept things that are not acceptable. I mean, I don't believe it's acceptable to continue further with exploitation of oil, for example, exploration of oil. I do believe that the oil we have to keep underground. That's not necessarily my answer. But then we need to provide pathways to that point of view to make it happen in reality. So yeah, that's 30 minutes. Thank you very much.
Can I invite, is this on? Yeah. Can I invite my other panelists on stage as well? I'll briefly introduce you and then hand it over so you can talk more about your work. We have Barbara Karsch-Chaïeb, sorry if I didn't pronounce that right, who is an artist and an art director here in Stuttgart. She has her own gallery and she has a little presentation that she's going to take us through. And we have Shanta Mayonandi, who does a lot of things. I can't really summarize it, but it's all around sustainability. She works in the Stuttgart Innovation Fund and is a member of the Club of Rome. And so I will hand it over to both of you to introduce yourselves more and your work. And then I'm sure we have a lot of questions. And following the introduction, we have a Q&A round for all of you as well. So if you just put your hand up when we're done, somebody will come and give you a mic. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you very much, Aoife, for the invitation. My name is Barbara Karsch-Chaïeb. I live and work in Stuttgart. I'm very pleased to be able to participate in this panel discussion today, which I briefly would like to introduce the art space Kunst, Klima, the exhibitions, the network, and the art education. The art space Kunst, Klima, Art, Climate, was founded in 2021, and it is a part of the Studio 104A, which exists since 2008 in a backyard in Stuttgart West. It is the first art space in Stuttgart to exclusively show exhibitions on the theme of climate change and sustainability. The bracket between the terms Kunst, Klima is provided with a blank space. It opens a possible space for communication and connection. The blank space preserves openness and flexibility. Unique exhibitions with works by artists from very different disciplines are shown, with a focus on predominantly scientific topics such as climate change, energy transition, weather, plants, earth history, history of the earth, biology, chemistry, and artificial intelligence. The focus of the exhibitions is largely on the content of a work shown and its art education. Lecturers of the area of science and others are invited to complement the exhibited topics. We make 4 exhibitions per year, one with an artist of the Academy of Fine Arts Stuttgart. We are very grateful for the financial support of the Cultural Office of the City of Stuttgart and the Foundation Rittersport. We try to sensibilize people's perception through our exhibitions, to raise their awareness, because only in this way, we believe, can anything be changed. Furthermore, we point out possibilities that can be used in our future and try to create and spread networks worldwide. Here are a few examples of our exhibitions. The first artist who exhibited in March 2022 in the art space was Evangelia Duni. She worked with earth, which she spread in the room and put a table and chairs on it. There were also collages printed on raw canvas showing motifs with details from everyday life and fragments of hands and arms. Clemens Schneider showed monumental works on paper made of used textiles, into which he incorporated elements that transformed noise from a neighboring construction site into meditative sound. In their work, Archaeology of a City Mine, from 2019 to 2022, the collective Anima Ona, Freya Achenbach and Schun Fabregas, built a room within a room with collected earth from the large construction site Stuttgart 21 and showed a digital archive of construction site finds and video films in it. This year, we started with the artist duo Badel-Sarbach from Switzerland, with the installation Lost Waters and Found Stairs, a video installation and various objects. I recommend the publication of this exhibition, the first one we made. Until June 16, Benjamin Miller, who studies with Öykü Süngün and Samuel Durand, among others, at the Academy of Fine Arts in Stuttgart, is exhibiting in the art space. In the exhibition Blossom, each monument is created only for a single moment. Each item is found in everyday environments, especially plants in the green spaces of Stuttgart. The exhibited pieces will be borrowed, assembled for the exhibition show, and then afterwards returned, if possible, otherwise recycled. The exhibition will change its appearance constantly over the period of 4 weeks. For the Friday, June 16, I'd like to invite you cordially to come to the finissage of the exhibition with a speech of Enno Lehmann. Thank you for your attention.
Can you hear me? I guess it's my turn now, and I'm just winging this part now. Who of you is feeling hopeful here about the climate crisis? So, for me, one thing is very important because I'm an environmental lawyer, and studying what is happening around us can very easily make you feel despair. I mean, as you were talking about all these core emotions, it's become a choice for me to see the glass as half full. Another quote that I'm led by is by Gandhi. I mean, I'm Indian, so I guess it was put into my cradle by my parents, is being the change I'd like to see in the world. And Martin Luther, if the world was to go down tomorrow, I'd still plant an apple tree. Why am I choosing this? From a neuroscience perspective, and I'm happy neuroscience is giving me confirmation here, we are far more active and proactive if we are acting from the prefrontal part of our brains, when we feel hopeful. Not because we don't see what is challenging, but because we choose to take ownership of what is happening. And that's something which is driving me in my work. With the Stuttgart Innovation Fund, I can use my expertise and experience to choose and support projects that I love. So that's part of my why. As an environmental lawyer, I look at the systemic parts, and with my work at Finding Sustainia, I've specialized on individual sustainable change, and quite selfishly, because I wanted to learn it myself, how to be sustainable in this world and still enjoy my life. And what I'm realizing is it doesn't only matter what your why is, it's also who you surround yourself with. That you're around people who are constructive and who are positive. Because I've noticed in my work, I've been an activist for at least 15 years, probably all my life. Actually 39, I think we share the same birth year. Is that people who are very negative drag you down. We are the 5 people we surround ourselves with. And for me, for instance, coming to Stuttgart is always a breath of fresh air, and it's definitely not your train station. And all these construction sites, it's incredible. We just got lost just coming here. My heels probably still have grass. It's the narrative that Stuttgart is boldly creating, even though it's looking quite grim sometimes. It's that it is administration at the Innovation Fund, which is choosing to go against all administrative hurdles to create that positive narrative. And that itself helps me to recharge my hope energy. And I invite all of you to also look out for those positive examples, because that is a very powerful way of rewiring our brain. And another thing I really highly recommend is doing media detoxes. Because our brain is wired to look for negative news. The news is full of negative news, and of course it's good to do it in a certain dosage, but once a day, once a week does suffice. I've experimented it myself, and I very much recommend it. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion. And I didn't say much about what I do, but I'm sure you can look me up on LinkedIn if that pleases you.
Great. Thank you so much to all of you. I'd like to start by asking you, Carlos, you were talking about this a little bit about hope, and I think nobody raised their hand, except me a little bit.
Thank you.
But I think we live in a time now that's so polarized between even hope and despair. You know, I mean, I think people have stopped denying climate change as much. It's very much being accepted as a reality. But now the new kind of denial is doomism, or this feeling that there's nothing we can do. And I think a lot of people are feeling it because politicians in power don't seem to be doing as much as they should be doing. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I know you've done a lot. But what I'm trying to ask you is how, when you were in power, how did you help change this dominant narrative, or how did you bring people from the polls to the center? Could you talk us through that process, how it was for you, and maybe some examples of what worked, what can work? Yeah, I think that could be a really central question for this entire crisis.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's still not on, I think.
Hello. Hello.
Can I help you?
Like
yeah. 1 second. Maybe you can use mine.
Thank you. Several things come to my mind. One, I do believe, I do have hope, and hope, I believe, is a choice. Hope is a choice. And for me, the root of hope is action. I decide to be hopeful, and I decide also to do something about it. And keeping it realistic is not to be just hopeful and naive about it. Because, yeah, I decide to be positive, and I decide to fight until the end. And it's true, we need to take care of our mental health. That's critical. I would love to hear more about it, because lots of the stimuli and the incentives outside are actually making us all depressed and bleak. But then we need to keep optimistic and fighting for what we believe is right. And I think we sometimes underestimate the power of change, of good change, and we tend to overlook the things, the positive things. I know we are very framed on the 2030 and how we are off track, and science keep telling us with this rationale we're off track, which is in that extent true. But I also see good change happen, but we tend not to emphasize on it because it's not yet enough. As I've said, let's not remember Paris happened in 2015. It's not been 10 years. And Paris Agreement is quite an accomplishment to have achieved. In 2019, again, we decided to, as the pre-COP, as the COP was not going to be held, we decided to step forward with Chile and Spain and said, we're going to organize it. We're going to do the pre-COP and the COP. And in the pre-COP that was held in Costa Rica and eventually in a meeting on France, we decided one of the key insights of science is that in order to repair the planet, we need to do the conservation, both of the oceans and of ecosystems. We need natural ecosystems for water, air, for basic human life services, not only human services, life services. So science says that at least you need to protect 30% of the land, 30% of the ocean. And that was a discussion we had in 2019, and we said, why don't we launch a global coalition to protect 30% of the ocean, 30% of the land. And there everybody said it was impossible. It was not going to happen. It was too ambitious. Even in the case of Costa Rica, which is a let's say, hardcore conservation country, we had to go a little further inland, like 1% or so. In the ocean, we have less than 3% of the ocean protected. And Costa Rica is 92% ocean. Wow. So the little strip that you see on the map is only 8%. We are mostly ocean. So we needed to protect the size of the ocean that's even bigger than our land territory. With all the interests that are surrounding that, actually is around the Cocos Island, the famous Cocos Island that's got all that biodiversity. So even in our case, many people said that's impossible. But no, we agreed to do that, and we launched a high ambition coalition for nature and people, and we started with 5 countries saying we need the 30 by 30. That's 30% of the ocean, 30% on the land by 2030. And as we were founders of that, we said we need to preach with the example. So we did in 2021, after a consultation process, we expanded our ocean protection from 3% to 30%. But not only that, the coalition started to grow. It went from 4 countries to 40 countries. And then it got to 100 countries. Everybody said it was impossible, but when we got to Glasgow, the coalition was little less short than 100 countries, but in Glasgow, Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, and Ecuador agreed to create one of the largest protected ocean areas in the Pacific. In Galapagos and Cocos Island, all that area, we agreed together to protect it. We were empathic in that moment. We were together, and nobody was like the leader of it. We were all together into that. When I ended up my term of president, we were more than 100 countries in the coalition. And on December of 2022, remember this story started in 2019, it's impossible to achieve it. In December of 2022 in Montreal, more than 190 countries decided to agree on the 30 by 30 goal. That means that 190 countries, small ones and big ones, are going to protect 30% of their territory, of the planet. So was it impossible? No. But we achieved that as a global community. But that doesn't make the trick, right? So it's possible to achieve those kinds of things. That's why I'm optimistic. It doesn't make the news. It's not like a Star Wars film that everybody goes to see it or so. But change is possible. It can happen.
Have you seen any sort of narrative shift within politics or within people, like in the larger community, when this change has happened? So since 2019 to now, have you seen like a narrative shift? Do you find more people hopeful, or do you think that because there's not enough news and coverage, and because we cover bad news anyway in the media, you haven't really seen as much as maybe you like?
I don't see a narrative change, but I do see change. That's the kind of the paradox. I do see change because in good ways and also some not good ways, but I do see opportunity. And if you're hopeful, you see the opportunity and you try to go for it. Why do I feel I see change? Especially because now the dominant, when we started doing this a while ago, during the Trump administration, I mean, you didn't see the dominant narratives going into that direction. So I remember talking with a fellow Costa Rican, Cristiana Figueres, who was the executive director of the convention while the Paris Agreement was signed, and we were talking about this, and sometimes we'll make philosophy and say, is this worth? But once Cristiana told me one thing I won't forget. She said, like, if you're in a big car jam and you have all the big vehicles, the trucks stocked, and you have a small bike, you can just go through and go ahead and everybody's going to look at you.
That's Paris.
Yeah, so that's a little bit like if you just go, then the others might see a way and follow. And now that I see things like the Inflation Reduction Act, I do see a dominant action in that direction of the decarbonization. I'm not saying it's 100% positive or 100% negative, but it's a big shift into one direction. It's going to, and I've seen the debate be moving obviously in Europe, but I've seen it as well in India. India is doing extraordinary efforts, for example, in photovoltaic energy. Even China is moving in that direction because it's not only a matter of the energy, it's a matter, and that's a different discussion, of owning the industries of the future. Mm-hmm. So in that regard, I do see a movement that was not there 10 years ago, was not there 5 years ago. It's now. On narrative, I don't see us following along, but I think it has to do with my answer, not the answer, but my answer is that we need to bring along this component of empathy, because even if well-meant, we sometimes enter in narratives that turn to be exclusive or confrontational. Right. If we say we need to do this change, full stop, we are leaving people out of the discussion, right, not giving them options. So I think we need to recognize that and say, okay, these are my needs, but what are your needs and how we can solve this?
Maybe Shanta, do you want to respond to that? I mean, because you work a lot with the well-being of especially activists, and maybe you're seeing some of this play out in your work.
The point of empathy you're raising is very important, and also when we have an opponent, let's say we want to discuss with our spouse. If I come with a lot of reproaches, the person shuts down. And so if you come from a place of empathy, of at least understanding where the other person is coming from, a place of fear, a place of not wanting to lose their business, a place of habits, I can listen and respond in a very different way, and the results are going to be better. And here I'm speaking from a negotiation background, where if the other person feels respected and seen, we get much further. I mean, there are some people we can never have a discussion with. I doubt I could do that with Trump. But with most people, if they feel respected and heard, we do at least get a few steps ahead.
Yeah, I think that's super important, and I will come back to that. Barbara, I just want to ask you, as an artist, what do you think the role of art and culture plays in this kind of empathy, talking to people, bringing people together, forming alliances? What has been your experience?
So, okay, yeah. So we are in a backyard in Stuttgart West, so it is very interesting. We try also to invite the neighbors and to talk with the neighbors, yeah, to be in a good mood with in our openings, and to talk or to bring them also in our space to talk about the art, because we see our art as possibility to make a transformation and to sensibilize them for an awareness and getting more mindfulness. And so we want to talk with the people from our surrounding. We think this is very important to start in this point, and not to think we go outside and we don't ignore them. Or yes, I think these are the people, they live there, and it's very interesting to bring them in our space. It's not easy to do. Yeah, I invite them always, and some of them are coming. And of course, all the artists are coming, but I also want to involve so the normal people.
Yeah, because it's so important. I mean, what you're talking about is at the local level, as we were discussing earlier, and then there's the global level with the history and the inequities and sort of global historical emissions and things like that. So, I mean, I think going forward, as we come from India and we're sitting here in Germany, I mean, there's like already this background, and especially when it comes to climate, and also in Costa Rica, I'm sure this is something that you have thought about a lot. I mean, how do you kind of move forward as a global community when there is so much stratification in society? And maybe you have examples of how it's worked, or where like a relationship has been built where kind of everyone moves forward at the same time. I mean, maybe you can respond first, Carlos, and then Shanta.
Well, it comes to mind in our examples in Costa Rica, that same framing that things are impossible. So when they abolished the army in 1948, people said it's impossible, we're going to get erased. And it didn't happen that way. I mean, we rely on international law, we have not been invaded, even though there has been dictatorships and things around us, but we have managed to live without it and use that to invest in other areas, only in education and healthcare. When some people on our national leadership said, we are going to create national parks and we're going to dramatically decrease deforestation. Costa Rica went from having 80% of forest coverage in the tropics to 20%. I mean, 60% of the forests were devastated in less than half a century or so. So they come up with an answer to create national parks and protected areas. Many people said we're going to destroy the livelihoods of farmers and of agriculture. And it went the other way. Actually, one of our main industries today, it's ecotourism. So it gave a response for better livelihoods. spread it all around the country. So similar when they say it's impossible to have a 30 by 30 coalition led by such a small country. So my thing is that it is from the local level and from the global level, there are things that are possible. The thing is, talking about mental health, we usually, when we know there's something we need to change, but we don't know how, there's a huge degree of anxiety. There's anxiety and there's resistance, and you feel threatened, and also, you feel threatened, and there are many, again, we're humans, there are many reactions going on within us. Either could be guilt. Nobody wants to feel guilty. It's awful feeling. You feel, or you feel angry. Why I'm not created this world. I mean, I not discovered fossil fuels. I not discovered this or that. Why you put it on me? Yeah. So I think we need to address that. That's why I think we need to take that energy and channelize it in a more constructive way.
There are some positive examples, for instance, on Netflix or Amazon Prime. You can see a far more diverse representation of, in terms of sexuality, in terms of people of color, and also body images. I mean, nowadays, when I grew up, everyone on the billboards was very, very skinny. And now you can see very different forms and shapes represented. And that's a positive example. And at the same time, when you look, you can see a lot of Apple signs in those series, which is also a way of shaping a narrative. And I guess a lot of people buy Apple because subconsciously they keep on seeing it in Netflix. And we could do the same for environmental products. So it wouldn't be something which is very active in the narrative, but it would be subconsciously through keeping on seeing the stars of your series with a reusable cup and taking the train instead of the plane, by choosing to not buy new things from, I don't know, Shein and H&M or whatever there is. But we can change the narrative through these means of art, through these means of daily life things that we consume, that we look at. And something you've just said about hopefulness and optimism and being pragmatic about it really rings a bell. Because some of us, that we are in gloomism and watch dystopian series and are just kind of in that very negative thing, everything's just going. And then there are others who are a bit like the princess in the castle and want to be rescued. And there's some optimism to that too. It's like a self-gaslighting optimism that we can have. And that none of these things work. We need to be pragmatic, not just optimistic. We need to be pragmatic and hope and work towards something, even if it doesn't work out. For instance, if your child was sick and it had an 80% probability of getting even sicker, wouldn't you do everything of increasing the probability of your child recovering? And the same narrative can be applied to our planet. We can change the odds, and we can do it through incremental changes. We can do it through connecting. You guys are choosing to be here today. Why is that? Maybe because you want to connect to hopeful narratives.
Do you want to respond, Barbara, or shall I?
I can talk.
Yeah, sure.
I can talk about two projects we want to make. We invited an artist from Berlin in September, and she is working on the subject of moss, because we think this is a very important topic, and I never heard before of that is moss so important for our world, and so she will make an action with eating the moss with chocolate, mixed with chocolate, and the word is earth. So this is one action, and also there is a collective, an artist collective. They took out the sound of the moss, so it's also and the datas of this, and transform it in a video. Wow. So I think this would be very interesting. Also complemented with a lecture of a scientist talking about this subject of moss. So this is one thing, and in December we invited an artist. She is established in Stuttgart, and she is working more with plastic recycling, and we suggested her to connect a professor from the University of Hohenheim because they work or they develop a facility to make plastic of plants. And so we will connect them and also work maybe with a lecturer, with her as a lecturer, and show. We will see what will happen. So these are the possibilities we have to do and we want to do.
Yeah, amazing. You're talking about connections and you're talking about making changes. And one thing that I feel with climate change is that because it's so big and complex, somehow it feels like sometimes, I don't know, maybe some of you in the audience feel this way, that you are only a small person and what you can do is only so little, whether it's to kind of throw away plastic straws or take the train instead of a plane or something like that. And so you feel like you can't impact larger action. And I think that is also a big part of how we think about this, that, yeah, you know, like I'm just nothing in this. So I wonder